What's up? My name is Shatter. I'm at a 35-page Mesa doc, and I remember that Warframe players can't really read, so I decided that a doc wasn't enough. We also need a video. Anyway, we'll split this video into two parts. We got the ability explanation segment and the build segment. Now, after all that, without further ado, let's get into it.
So Ballistic Battery is Mesa's first ability. On the first cast, it starts storing the damage that you do, and this stores up to a cap, which is at base 5,000 damage, but it also scales with strength. On recast, it applies to the damage to a single shot, and this is literally like a single shot. Doesn't matter how much multi-shot you have, doesn't matter how many bullets the thing innately fires, it will only apply to one bullet. This damage is also boosted by the standard multipliers, so stuff like elemental damage, crit damage, faction mods, headshot bonus, and status effects, but it is not boosted by percent damage like Serration. And on to sample gameplay. So as you can see in this clip, you cast the ability, you deal damage, and then once you store it all, you recast it, and then all that damage is applied to one bullet. Right there, yes. Anyway, here's the slide on Ballistic Battery. It's the augment for Mesa's 1. It applies a flat amount of crit chance to the shot that was buffed by Ballistic Battery. This is at base 50 flat crit chance, but it also scales with strength. And instead of just buffing one bullet, it buffs all the bullets, including multi-shot. It's technically not supposed to work this way. It's only supposed to buff the one bullet, but yeah, it does. And don't tell DE. And onto the gameplay demonstration. So as you can see here, I have Ballistic Bullseye on, and with all the strength I have, it is currently about a 150% crit chance. And with the 35% crit chance that's already there, so as you can see, I activated it, and right here I'm doing about whites and yellows, but once I do this, it is all oranges. So yeah, that's basically what it does. So just to make it clear, only one of them is actually being buffed by Ballistic Battery, but all of them are being buffed by Ballistic Bullseye. So that's kind of interesting. So anyway, changed up the colors to make it easier on the eyes. But here's Shooting Gallery, Mesa's second ability. So, first part is that it's a CC, so it jams the guns of enemies around you, and their knives. You can jam a knife. And, the way that it applies this, like, jam and stun is kind of weird. And honestly, it's easier to just show you. I'll just show you in the next segment. But, yeah. It also applies a very small damage buff, which is 25% at base, scaling with strength. This is also additive to Serration, so that shows you, like, yeah, this thing is basically nothing. Like I said, yeah, it's an extremely small buff, 99% of the time. It's not worth putting strength into. Not really gonna do much. You would need almost 900 strength to match Serration. So yeah. The buff also applies to one other teammate. So if you have 4 teammates, it'll apply to you and to one of your teammates, and it'll rotate between them every few seconds. So yeah, anyway, on to the gameplay segment and trying to showcase how the stun works. I still don't even get it. So anyway, here's the gameplay segment. You press your 2 ability, and then it shoots out this little beam of light and stuns some of the enemies. And then every second or so, it will stun some other enemies. And yeah, I'm still confused on how it chooses enemies to stun, but eventually it will stun everybody. On to the augment, the more important part of this ability. So, Muzzle Flash is the augment for Mesa 2, and honestly, the only reason you'd ever use Mesa 2. It blinds enemies after 6 kills from either you or the teammate that also had Shooting Gallery on them. If you recall what I said, like, I don't know, 10 seconds ago, Shooting Gallery applies to you and one teammate, and it rotates between your teammates. So it basically combines your kills and your teammates' kills while you're in there, and then it stores them up for this blind. Yeah, you can self-proc this. Like I said, the buff is also on yourself. Even though it says 6 kill assists, you do count as your own ally, so you can just proc it by yourself and blind enemies. And, the duration and the range are both boosted by mods, so 6 seconds and 12 meters. These can go higher. And it's also one of, if not the strongest CCs in the game. So unlike the regular shooting gallery CC, which is kind of funky and only stuns some of the enemies sometimes, this one stuns all of the enemies very consistently. It's great. Like the only one that's maybe stronger is Rhino Stomp. But yeah, let's get to the gameplay segment and actually show how this thing like actually works. So anyway, here's the muzzle flash segment. So you pop the ability, you kill like 6 enemies, and it only procs on the next shot. So since that was only like literally one shot from my Zaw, it didn't really count. But now I'm here, and then yeah, now they're all stunned. Those within range are stunned. But this can also be modded with strength. So if I throw on like overextended on this thing, and then I go and proc the thing again, I can like stand like, I think the range is like all the way back here, and yeah, like everyone is stunned. So yeah, that's really nice. No mess, no nothing. It just blinds everybody within a really big radius. So yeah, that's real nice. So Shatter Shield is Mesa's third ability. It provides damage resistance versus bullets and projectiles. And as such, it doesn't provide that to AoE attacks and melee attacks. And it is 80% at base and 95% at 119 strength. So as you can see, the barrier or the breakpoint to max it out is extremely low at only 119 strength. It also reflects these bullets back at the enemy, and the damage these bullets do is based off of the enemy's damage and other stats. So yeah, it's the whole thing. On to the gameplay segment. So I'm gonna assume you guys know what damage reduction does, but one thing that you can do is you can stack them. So here's 90%, this is 95%, and what this does is this gives me like just absurd amount of survivability with these base SP enemies. Like I can kind of just stand here and yeah, just literally just stand here. Anyway, on to the next segment. Staggering Shield is the augment for Mesa's 3. It basically gives the bullet reflected a chance to stagger the enemies. This is 50% at base and max out 100% at 200 strength. Yeah, that's the whole thing. On to the gameplay segment. Yeah, so anyway, this augment's real simple. We have Staggering Shield, we have about 200 strength to max out the thing. Oh, hold up, let me just button one to make it clear. And then if I can get him to shoot me, there we go, he's staggered. There you go, he's staggered again. Yeah, that's it. Alright. So here is probably the part that you've been waiting for. This is Peacekeepers Mesa's 4. This is her bread and butter. If you came to this video, you're probably looking for a build focused around this. Or you're looking for a build focused around her one. Some people like that. Unfortunately not in this video. You can either check the document that I have in the description, or you can just wait for me to make my next few videos, because I will be making 3 separate videos on all of her other abilities, because they all have something really weird going on, partially because they're old, and basically it makes them all just super strong, and just, yeah. So anyway, let's get on with it. Each shot scales the damage and fire rate and narrows the focus circle. It's just actually every other shot, because it fires in bursts of 2. So every burst, it scales the damage and fire rate, but narrows the focus circle, like the circle in the middle, that like where Mesa can shoot. Like I said, it ramps the damage and fire rate, and it maxes out at 20 bursts, which is why we like to build as much fire rate as we can on this thing, because so we can max that out as fast as we can to get our max damage as soon as we can. It says 150% multiplicative damage, so it's multiplicative to damage mods, but this doesn't scale at all. No matter how much strength you have, this will always be 150%. It ramps your fire rate from 0.25x to 1x, and then the minimum focus circle scales with your range. At base, this is 15 degrees, and it can get bigger or smaller depending on what your range stat is at the current moment. But if you're like frequently like going in and leaving, this range stat doesn't really matter unless you're running Muzzle Flash, which I talked about earlier. Strength is additive to other strength mods. Unlike other exalteds, Mesa is one of 3 exalteds where strength is additive, these 3 being Regulators, Sights Exalted, and Temples Exalted. That's was why we don't really build too many strength mods. We put like 1 or 2 at most. And she can't move during this ability normally. She does maintain like her momentum and velocity though. So if you cast it like while you're mid-air and like you're like already like flying through the air, you won't just like fully stop and fall straight to the floor. You will still keep gliding for a second. Or if you're like sliding on the floor and you activate it, you will slide a little bit. Anyway, onto the gameplay segment. Yay! So here's a Mesa with no mods on it at all. And then so if we spawn in some enemies, my damage will ramp up. As you can see, my fire rate ramps up, the focus circle gets smaller, and as you can see that took a while to fully ramp up. But if we switch my Mesa to one with a higher fire rate, I have anemic here. Let's swap this to Firax so I can get my 45% fire rate. Here's another 60 from Reinforced Bond, and then I have another 120 from Velocity. And then if we check this, yeah, that wrapped up a lot quicker than the other build. So yeah, that's just like a visual representation of how much fire rate mattered to the ramp. But now we're gonna go on to the augment. Y'all probably know this one, but I'm gonna go over it anyway, just for the sake of being thorough. Here's the augment segment. Waltz is the augment for Mesa 4. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm on the fence about it. It lets her walk during her 4. It also slows you down by 50%, as you can see on the mod itself. It also lets her roll, but it also no longer negates hard landings. I'll show you this once we get to the gameplay segment, but yeah. And you can still shoot during these hard landings, just like you can't move. But you couldn't move during regular Mesa 4 anyway, so this doesn't really change much. But you can also just roll before you hit the floor and completely negate that roll. Anyway, let's get on with it. Anyway, here's Mesa's Waltz. So, as you can tell, what it lets you do is kind of just, wow, now I can walk. And you can also roll during this, so it's not like super slow, but yeah. Also, quick tip that I forgot to mention: if you have Nairu on, like the Nairu focus path, and you have a poise unlocked, then if you proc this, let me get this down here, and then proc it, the slow is actually like fully negated from Waltz, which is kind of nice. So after that, just for reference, this is what happens after we cleanse that poise. It's still there, but it is cleansed, and as you can see, it is much slower. So yeah. Also, like I told you before, you will receive the document animation if you fall with this thing. But, like, if you don't have it on, so let's take off Waltz here, and we do the exact same thing, yeah, nothing happens. But yeah, anyway, that's it for abilities. That's all of her abilities. Yeah.
So in terms of, or before we start actually talking about the builds, I want to start with Regulator builds before we get into the actual build. And before that, I want to start with the Regulator Arcanes. So let's start here. Your number one option here is Secondary Outburst. This will consume your combo multiplier and give 20% secondary crit chance and crit damage per combo multiplier consumed up to 240%, which is a 12x combo. This is your highest damage option, but really only necessary if you're going to level cap. If you're not going to level cap, I would say this is too much work for too little benefit. But if you're going to level cap, I would say this is almost a necessity unless you want to manually prime things, which I have seen a lot of other YouTubers do. They use Epitaph and manually prime things. That's not my style. If you want to, go ahead. It's not my style. That's why I really like secondary outbursts for level cap runs. Your second option is secondary fortifier. This option it steals overguard at a 1 to 100 conversion rate. So for every 100 damage you do to overguard, you get 1 overguard, and it does 8. You do 8 times damage to overguard. At base steel path or like ETA, EDA, um, your overguard will almost never break if you have this, and if it does break, you can quickly get it back. It does get outscaled in terms of damage in a level cap run. I remember I ran a Grenier level cap once with secondary fortifier, and by level 1000, it got kind of hard to kill enemies, mainly because of the fact that you lose like since regular enemies don't have overguard, you lose so much damage, especially compared to outburst. But it's still a super comfy option for base steel path and all your standard options, EDA, ETA, and it does. You can bring it to cap if you like I said, if you manually prime things, you bring an epitaph, you bring a primer nuke aura and start priming things. And your third option is Cascadia Flare. Um, this stacks up 12% damage percent on each heat status application, up to 480% damage percent, which is equivalent to, if I remember my strength scaling correctly, I think that's about 300% strength and a little bit of change. Um, I'd say this is your best budget option. It is a Cascade Arcane, so they run about 30 plat for max. If you don't have the first two, which, especially when out of season, like, Belly of the Beast was pretty recent, so Fortifier shouldn't be too expensive right now, but Outburst is like 200 plat. Fortifier can get expensive when it's out of season. Cascadia Flare is your best budget option, but outside of being a budget option, I personally would not run it. But yeah, anyway, let's get on to the actual build. So anyway, this is my Regulators build. It's fairly standard as far as Regulator builds go. You have your multi-shot, your damage percent. Um, this one mod is the main reason why we usually don't build a lot of strength. I did mention earlier that strength didn't scale so well, because it was additive, and it's additive to this. This gives 120 damage percent per status on the enemy. So if you have like 3 statuses on the enemy, that's 360% damage, which is equivalent to 200% strength. If you have 4 statuses on the enemy, then that's equivalent to 300% strength. And this is all additive, and you start hitting diminishing returns breakpoints really early on. But yeah, that's the main reason. This one mod is the main reason why, one of the main reasons why we don't build a lot of strength. And um, yeah, like I said earlier, we're modded for corrosive heat because, spoiler warning, I do subsume nourish onto my mesa, so this would actually be heat, corrosive, and we'd have viral down here. And obviously, crit mods, crit damage, crit chance. Um, there is a breakpoint to where anemic agility is a better slot than prime pistol gambit. This will be displayed on the screen now, hopefully, if I figured out how to do that at this point. But um, yeah, for if you have Outburst on, which I talked about earlier, this is 300% crit chance, which is a hot shot or 4 Tau orange shards, um, or some mix of those. Basically, 300% external crit chance plus an outburst at 12x. That in that case, anything that or anything above that, anemic would be better. If you have fortifier on or anything really that's not outburst, this breakpoint does change to 375% as it should say, which is hot shot plus 1 Tau shard or 5 Tau shards or 5 Tau orange shards, I should mention. Um, and yeah, that's about all I have to say for regulators builds. If you are not using if you're not using nourish, if you're using something else like an armor strip subsume or anything that's not nourish, I would say to swap out like primed convulsion for deep freeze so you can get viral heat. I'm not gonna do that right now because I don't have space, and I also am running nourish. So yeah. Um. Anyway, on to some extra notes about the actual Mesa build itself, among other things. Alright, under Mesa Arcane's first slot is Arcane Velocity. In my opinion, Mesa's most important arcane. You should always have Arcane Velocity on when you play Mesa. 120% secondary fire rate is a lot of fire rate. I should have explained earlier why this is really good to stack as much fire rate as possible, but if you're building a Mesa build and you don't want to use mine, I don't care as long as you have Arcane Velocity on this. This is the one non-negotiable. If you're using Mesa's 4, you need Arcane Velocity. And obviously, Mesa has a really high crit chance, so you proc this like infinitely, it never goes down. Your second slot is a bit more gracious. The two most popular options are Arcane Avenger and Arcane Hotshot. Arcane Avenger being cheaper, but only capping out at 45 flat crit chance, and Arcane Hotshot being harder to get, taking longer to get, but at max giving 300% modded crit chance, which translates to about 75% actual crit chance. One thing to note is that at lower levels, Hotshot is harder to proc, mainly because enemies are dying before you can heat proc them, because of Mesa's innate 10% status chance, but at higher levels this isn't really a problem, because they live enough to take the heat procs, but this is still good to know. If you don't have these two, I would try and get them, but if you don't, alternative options, Arcane Concentration for the extra duration. Arcane Aegis is always a good survivability option, or like an emergency thing if you get hit, and Aegis procs, you don't die. Molt Augmented is just good. Arcane Circumvent, it's a good utility. You get Armor Strip, you get Shield Strip, you get Overguard Strip. You can get to steal this stuff, and Energize is just good for energy. It's not needed because, like later I will show in the Mesa build, flow plus equilibrium plus synth deconstruct on your companion is more than enough energy to completely sustain Mesa, especially if you have Nourish on with the energy molt from that. But yeah, anyway, on to this next slide. Anyway, important strength breakpoint. Precision Intense Fight is better than Umbral Intense Fight if the enemy has less than 2 statuses on them, or 2 or less statuses on them. So, like, if you have a Panzer Volpophyla, this thing will usually only prime, like, Viral and maybe the occasional Electricity proc. So that's only, like, 1 or 2 statuses. In this case, I would use Precision Intensify over Umbral Intensify on the build, because you usually only have, like, 1 strength slot. And obviously you can only slot 1 Intensify. But Umbral Intensify is better than Precision if you have 3 or more statuses on them. This is like if you're using a Sentinel or like a Hound, which can regularly prime 4 statuses. If you have max manifold bond stacks, this thing hits like, I think like a whole lot of statuses. I haven't even counted. Enough statuses to where Umbral is significantly better than Precision at that point. Anyway, after all that, let's get on to the build. Anyway, onto the build segment. This is my usual Mesa build. It is a active gate build. With the shards, I usually run 4 secondary CC oranges and 1 Tau yellow cast shard. You can drop like 1 more orange for another yellow shard if you want, but I personally think like you should run at least 3 orange shards. And some alternate subsume options you can use if you don't like Nourish here. You could run Zada's Whisper. I found Blast, like Zada Blast Mesa can be kind of fun and works pretty well. And Terrify and Fire Blast are some other good options. They're just relatively standard armor strip subsumes. Fire Blast is a little more niche, but I think it's pretty good on Mesa. I'll explain why later. But yeah, anyway, onto the gameplay segment, and I'll explain some of the more specific parts of this build there. So in terms of horror slot, corrosive projection is really the only real slot. I'm gonna go over some other popular options and basically say like why they're not as good. If you don't know, corrosive projection on enemies with armor is about if I remember correctly, 1.85 times multiplier with no other armor strip, which is a pretty big multiplier. Um, So let's look at some other options. Growing power is pretty popular. It's 25% strength on status application. That is 37.5% damage on regulators, which is about a quarter, no, not a quarter, a third of a co-stack, which is not very good. Pistol amp is 27% damage on secondaries, like regulators. That's 2% more than shooting gallery, and shooting gallery is not that good of a buff. So yeah, you're getting marginally more than a bad buff, which means it's also bad. Worthy Camaraderie gives 75% headshot crit chance. Mesa aims for center of mass, you're not hitting very many headshots, if at all. Energy economy, you add prime flow plus equilibrium plus synth deconstruct on your companion, and you get virtually infinite energy. You throw nourish on there, and you do actually just get infinite energy, just totally. Survivability, catalyzing shields makes all your shield gates 1.33 seconds, and your shield count doesn't actually matter, so you can just throw one auger mod anywhere, and then you proc one ability, and then you just get your full gate. Your common methods for Mesa include your 4, because your 4 has practically no cast time, and your 1 while in 4, your actual one, not nourish. Ballistic battery. This also doesn't have a cast time, so it's also decent for gating. In higher levels, gating with 4 can be kinda iffy, in my opinion, so that's why I either like Vazor and Protective Sling, or gating with your 1 while in your 4. Anyway, so I know a lot of people don't like shield gating, so here's a build more tailored towards those people, because yeah, I mean, yeah, some people don't like shield gating. I get that. It can be kind of hard sometimes. So here's a slightly easier build. It basically relies on just stacking as much EHP as possible, which I'll explain a bit later. And I mean, yeah, most of the build is the same. It just has adaptation and vitality over catalyzing shield and one of the range mods. But yeah, the alternative subsumes are the same as last time, but you can also subsume Gloom on. Gloom is actually just makes the build just super comfy, and you just like heal off all the damage you take, and the shards are the exact same as last time. Same notes. Alright, let's get on to extra notes. Most of the notes are the same. There's like a few things that are different though. So yeah, let's get on with it. So survivability, it's a lot easier on this build. Basically you take adaptation, which is 90% DR, Shatter, which is a 95% DR, which stacks additively into 99.5% DR, plus secondary fortifier for extra overguard steel, and vitality for just the extra effective HP, and you just get a buttload of EHP and standard EHP standing for effective HP. Anyway, basically in standard gameplay, that like a standard DE gameplay, steel path, EDA, ETA, stuff like that, you basically just never die, ever. Especially if you have gloom, but even without gloom, you also basically just never die. Especially if you have muzzle flash on too. Yeah, this build is really good at not dying in these intended game modes. Vitality versus Archon Vitality, it's about a give or take 2.5% extra DPS over regular Vitality depending on conditions, which isn't a lot, and it also doesn't doesn't double stack Hotshot. So if you already have it and you want to use it, sure, go ahead. If you don't have it, I wouldn't level it up just for this. I know a lot of people have it on there, but Mesa's status damage is so negligible compared to like the rest of her damage that basically it's just like not worth using. Basically, it's not worth the extra storage, in my opinion. Yeah. Anyway, let's get on to like weapon suggestions. So this is my usual loadout. I talked about why I like Bazin earlier. Also something important to note on here, I have Zidanuskos. That's an extra 250% heat, which is a lot of heat percent, and just like status, like heat percent that you just don't want to miss out on. This is just a one tap Thrax. Anyway, that's not really important here. Aphentis here, I just modded max fire rate here, This is just here for the spin speed, and that's just here, so it makes it easier to put enemies to sleep to actually get finishers, which isn't really necessary for this build since we have Vazarin with Void Snare. But if you're not using Vazarin, it makes it a lot more useful. I use the Furious as like a Thrax killer. That's my Riven, but yeah, it's mostly just here to kill Thrax, steal Overguard. Main reason I have this over something like Epitaph. So like Epitaph is pretty good at, where's my Epitaph? Yeah, like Epitaph, I've seen a lot of people use that. It's pretty good at priming enemies, but the problem is like sometimes um, Thrax can get bugged to the point where Mesa's regulators cannot target them. So I like having something like Furious. So just in case that does happen, I can still kill the Thrax. Furax Wraith is here. Obviously, Furax body count, 45% fire rate, it applies to Thrax. So obvious, not Thrax, doesn't apply to Thrax, it applies to regulators. Obviously, 45% fire rate is good. The rest of this is just built for finishers, so we can stack Crescendo, and obviously get those outburst stacks that we talked about earlier. Yeah. For a companion, I personally like Worm a lot, mainly because with Worm, you with calculated you hit reinforced bond breakpoint, so that's an extra 60% fire rate. You get negate, which is just status immunity, which is super nice, and it's also robotic, so you also get access to Tazikor, which is just super good at priming, super good AoE priming, and yeah, it's just really good, and also has a high AoE, so you tag a lot of things with for synth deconstruct, like I talked about earlier. Something else you could do is like instead of like if you don't want to stack Crescendo, you can go with like Ceramic Dagger and with a primary like Boar. I like Boar specifically because it is a heat beam, so while you are stacking Ceramic Daggers, Gun and Blade passive, to get that initial combo instead of from Crescendo, you are also stacking your Tau Shards, which is super nice. One thing to note here is that with all of these like initial combo, um, with like all of your passive, with all the passives and all this initial combo, that gets you to 10x combo without hitting a single finisher. If you have a Riven on it with 34% initial combo, that gets you to 11x combo. So, or 11x combo without any finishers. So that should be noted if you want that extra 20% fire rate, or not fire rate, crit chance, crit damage, and yeah. But oh, I just remembered I forgot to mention Panzer. I know a lot of people like Panzer. This is my personal setup on it. You do hit reinforced, which is nice, and stuff. My only problem with like Panzer right now is just like the coverage of Panzer isn't quite as good as like Worm with Tazikor, and it's still pretty good, but like you get like slightly lower coverage, um, less like amount of statuses. So overall, I personally prefer my Worm. So yeah. Anyway, on to extra notes and stuff. Anyway, here's some like extra notes and stuff that I didn't really know where to put anywhere else, so I'm just gonna put them here at the end. Um, I don't like Bright Bonnet. I think Bright Bonnet sucks. Um, It has an extremely high breakpoint to max it out at 500% strength and at 300% strength, which I'd say is a relatively reasonable amount of strength to have. That's like what Blind Rage plus Transient Fortitude plus Umbral Intensify. You get an extra 60% strength from Bright Bonnet, which is 90% damage percent on regulators and 15% damage on shooting gallery. That is less than one co-stack. That is 105% damage, and one co-stack is 120. At the same breakpoint, Nourish provides 135% viral, which if you know how the damage formula works, is a lot more than one co-stack. And even then, if you mod your regulators for corrosive heat like we did earlier, you also get an extra co-stack from this. So it's just like what's the point of ever using bright on it? I mean, yeah, the energy is fine, sure, but at that point, this is basically just a glorified dispensary, and brick dispensary isn't that good either. Like, yeah, like I said, it's slightly better dispensary. Yeah. Fire Blast doesn't actually suck, specifically on Mesa. On other frames, it does still suck. But on Mesa specifically, I do think that it is actually a really good option. It has an extremely low strength breakpoint. Unlike Brightbonnet, it maxes out at 100% strength, and even though it is only a 75% armor strip innately, that is like additive to other armor strips, like Corrosive Projection, which makes it 93%, plus the Heat Proc, it actually goes to about 96% armor strip on one cast. And the Heat Proc also stacks and maintains Hotshot, which is just super helpful sometimes, especially at lower levels where it's harder to stack Hotshot. And it's a super fast and a super cheap cast, which I'm a big fan of. The one potential downside is heat disinherit. If you don't know, um, the way heat damage over time works is that it takes the heat percentage and the faction bonus of the very first heat proc that it takes, and as all abilities have what 0% heat on them, and only a faction if you have roar. Which if you're subsuming on Fire Blast, you obviously don't have roar, but um, Mesa's, like we said with Archon Vitality, her status damage makes up so little of her actual damage that it really doesn't matter that much that you're losing heat dot. Anyway, I've been looking for an excuse to do this. Mesa Heirloom skin giveaway. Um, yeah, just put down a comment in the comments. Just give me like a poem or something. Whoever spits the hardest bars gets the skin. I will be the judge. Obviously, it's my video. What are you gonna do? Tell me otherwise? Anyway, I'm planning on making this a four-part series. This is just like the basics, basic builds, basics on each ability. I'm planning on making like three more videos going on the more advanced stuff on her one, her two, her three. All this stuff is already on the document, but y'all remember what I said at the beginning of the video. People don't read. So anyway, yeah. Um, that is all I have to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.